Hit it, hit it.
Hi, I'm MarlyBird, and you're watching the MarlyBird YouTube channel. In this video, you're going to learn how to make the ribbed scarf designed by Kathy Wesley. This is a free pattern available for download over at redheart.com. In this video, you're going to learn how to do a cast on, a knit to, purl to rib, and how to bind off in pattern. As a bonus, I show you how I like to weave in ends when I'm doing a knit to, purl to scarf, just like this particular pattern. All the materials you need for this particular pattern are available over at redheart.com. In this video, I'm going to use some alternative yarn so that way it can show the stitches better as I'm showing you how to make this project. All right, if you guys are ready, I'm ready. Look down here and I'm going to show you what you need to get started. For this scarf, you're going to need to download the pattern over at redheart.com called the ribbed scarf. For today's purposes, I'm going to use Red Heart soft yarn because it is a nice worsted weight smooth yarn that I feel like you'll be able to see the stitches best. I'm going to use 2 stitch markers, a steel tapestry needle because I feel like it's easier to weave in your ends with that. And I'm going to use a pair of size 8 circular knitting needles. The reason I'm using circular needles is because I tend to work best with them because I don't lose a needle off the side. And even though I'm going to be working this scarf as a straight stitch going back and forth, I can still use circulars. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to go ahead and move all of this aside. Why don't you go ahead and gather your tools and join me back here and I'm going to get you started. To begin this scarf pattern, the instructions say that we need to do a cast on of 30 stitches. I'm going to do a long tail cast on, and to do that, I need to make sure I have enough yarn in my tail to complete the long tail cast on. To do that, I am going to guesstimate the width of my final project, and I'm going to calculate that 3 times in length plus a little bit extra, and that's where I'm going to put my slip knot. By putting my slip knot at that point, it makes it to where I have just about enough, I have enough yarn to complete my 30 stitches. I've created a slip knot and I'm going to put that slip knot directly onto my needle. If you need a refresher on how to do a slip knot, there is a link in the instructions below this video for the video I did regarding slip knots. Once you have your slip knot on your needle, it's time to get started with the long tail cast on. Now, the long tail cast on is done by working with the tail of the yarn and working with the yarn that's still attached to the yarn ball. We're going to call that the working yarn. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tail of the yarn and I'm going to put it on the outside of my thumb, and I'm going to take the working yarn and I'm going to put it on the outside of my finger. Can you see that? By doing that, what that does, it gives me kind of this slingshot motion going on right here. And when I have the slingshot motion, I'm going to take my needle. I'm going to start at the bottom of my thumb. So I'm going to go up the thumb and grab that yarn. I'm going to swivel around to the tip of my finger and come down my finger and grab that yarn. Now I have this nice little window right there between my thumb and the needle. Can you see that window? With that window, I'm going to take my needle. I'm going to swing it through the window. You see that? I'm going right through the window and up. And then I let the yarn fall off my thumb. And as I pull the tail, it tightens it up around my needle. I'm going to do that one more time. I'm going to readjust, make sure everything's in hand. So I have the tail over my thumb, the working yarn over my finger, and I have my needle. You can see I'm using my right hand to really hold on to my stitches so that way they don't fall off of the needle as I'm working this because I don't want that to happen. I'm going to take my needle, go down at the bottom of my thumb. I'm going to go up the thumb. I'm going to swivel around here to the tip of my finger and go down my finger, grab that yarn. I'm going to go swing through that window. You see that? Swing through that window. If I tip by like this is where I am. I'm swinging through that window and out, and then I drop it off of my thumb. And if I come down here, I grab my tail and I'm pulling it snug. Up the thumb, down the finger, through the window, off the thumb, pull the tail. So right there, I have 4 stitches on there because we're going to count our slip knot as a stitch. So there's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now I'm going to bust out the rest of these real quick so that way you guys don't have to sit here and watch me count continuously. 15, 16, continuously really slow. I'm going to get these all on here. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to count once I get as many as I think I need on there. Since I've been talking, I lose track. I do that all the time. That's okay though. That's all right. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to count. So I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 29, 30. Now I have a nice length of tail left over, no problem. I'm just going to leave that there. If you want to go ahead and trim it up because it's super long, you can do that as well. Just make sure you leave 4 to 6 inches so that it's easy to weave in your tail. Now, even though as I'm on circulars, once again, I'm going to treat them as if they're straight. So I'm putting the needle with all the stitches in it into my left hand, just like it's my left hand needle. And I'm grabbing the right hand needle in my right hand. Now, the instructions say that we're going to slip the first stitch knitwise. What that means is with the yarn in back, I'm going to take my right hand needle. I'm going to go into the stitch just like I'm going to knit it. Okay, so I'm going into the stitch just like I'm going to knit it. I'm going to slip it off without doing anything else to the stitch. Then I go ahead and I knit the next stitch. Now we have to go on in our pattern and it says purl 2, knit 2. So to purl 2, our yarn is in back because we just completed 2 knit stitches. We're going to take our yarn, we're going to go between our needle and bring our yarn to the front. Okay, so I'm going to put my yarn in the back. I'm going to switch hands so that those of you who are not continental can see what I mean. My yarn's in back, oops, because I just knit 2 stitches. Well, now I just came undone. So I can go ahead and redo that knit stitch. My yarn's in back. I have to come and I have to go between my needles. So I go between my needles. Now my yarn's in front and I'm ready to do 2 purls. So I go into the stitch like to purl. I purl 1 and I purl 2. Now it's time to knit 2 stitches. So I take my yarn and I have to go between my needles and go back to the back. If you do not go between your needles as you switch between the stitches, you guys, you will get an accidental yarn over, which means you will have more stitches on your needles than you planned for, okay? As you see, I'm going along here. I'm going ahead and I'm knitting 2, and then I'm purling 2, and I'm moving the yarn to the front when I purl, and I move the yarn to the back when I knit all the way along. So I'm on my knit 2, knit 1, knit 2, bring yarn to the front, purl 1, yarn to the front, purl 2, yarn to the back, knit 1, knit 2. I split my yarn. Yarn to the front, purl 1, yarn to the front, purl 2, yarn to the back, knit 1, yarn to the back, knit 2, yarn to the front, purl 1, yarn to the front, purl 2, yarn to the back, knit 1, yarn to the back, knit 2. Now the instructions say repeat all of those until you're to the last 4 stitches. And it says now it says for me to go ahead and purl 2 and then do a knit 1 and a purl 1. All right. So, and then I'm done with that row. So I change hands again. I put those stitches into my left hand. And I go ahead and continue on. Now, as you're working in a pattern like this, it's very easy to get confused between rows 1 and row 2. So I'm going to show you a little trick on how I keep track between the 2. So we're beginning row 2, and what I'm going to do is, knowing that the first 2 stitches and the last 2 stitches of this row and the previous row are a little bit different from each other, I'm going to put a marker. So that way I know that these first 2 stitches are different and the last 2 stitches are different. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make each marker a different color. And that way when I come up to the marker, if it is a green marker, I'm going to know that I'm on a row 2. If it is a silver or like clear metallic marker, I know that I'm on a row 1. All right, so here I go. So I'm on row 2. I go ahead and I slip 1 knitwise and I purl 1. My yarn's in front, and I purl 1. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take my marker. Now, when you have a marker, all you do is you just slip it right on the right-hand needle, and you don't have to do anything else. It just sits there, okay? Now the instructions say to go on in pattern. So I knit 1 and I knit 2. Yarn to the front, I purl 1 and I purl 2. I do this all the way along to the very end. On the last 2 stitches of this row, I'm going to put another marker though. Actually, you know what? I'm going to wait. I'm going to put them on the first 2 stitches of the next row, so that way you can better see what it is that those markers are going to be doing. I'm doing this all the way down the row. What's really cool is as you start doing this pattern and working it along, you'll see that you are stacking your purls and stacking your knits. So as you're working along, and if you see a knit stitch, then you're going to knit it. If you see a purl stitch, you're going to purl it. It makes it really easy to go ahead and work this pattern without having to memorize any sort of row 1 or row 2. However, because the first 2 stitches of this pattern are different and the last 2 stitches are different on row 1, it's easier to have the marker in place to help you out with that. As I turn this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm on row 1 again. So I slip the first one knitwise, I knit the next stitch, and then it continues on for my repeat. This is where I'm going to put my marker. So I have my second marker and I place it on my needle. Can you see? It's just hanging out there. Now, every time I come across these markers when I'm working my pattern, I know that when I see the silver or the clear marker, I am on a row 1. Okay. When I see the teal or the green marker, I'm on a row 2. Does that make sense? So for me, having visual cues like that as I'm knitting along really helps me understand where I am in the pattern, because, I have kids, I have distractions, I have email, I have a smartphone that I get text on, and I'm constantly losing my place in a pattern. So anything to help me stay on track, the better for me. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to finish out this row, and then I'm going to bring over an example of what this would look like if you were working along and you got several rows into it. You can see I'm here at the marker. Now, I just finished purling 2. I go ahead, I move my yarn to the back. I slip my marker, so I just go into the marker and slip it over to my right-hand needle. Don't do anything else with it. And I finish off, and this is my clue that these last 2 stitches are different because it's a knit 1 and then purl 1. You see that? See how that works out? So if I were to roll these over onto the nice cable, you can see that I'm starting to build knit stitches and purl stitches and knit stitches and purl stitches. So they would carry on like that. I'm going to move this aside, and I'm going to bring in one that I've already been working on. And again, I've got the markers in place so that I know where it's a row 1 or row 2. And you can see that as the ribbing starts to take place, it really pulls in on itself. You see that? So as you're working along with ribbing, it is reversible. So it makes a really great pattern for a reversible pattern. Just by knowing that I have my markers in place, and these are also the same one, where silver represents row 1 and green represents row 2, you at home automatically know, oh, Marley's looking at her silver one right here. She's beginning a row 1. Okay, so that's what I would begin on. Now I'm going to jump down to where if this were the length of the scarf that you want to have it be. The pattern says that you want it to be 64 inches. You can make it shorter or longer. It's totally up to you. But it does say that once it reaches 64 inches, you want to end with a wrong side row. What that means is you want to end after completing a wrong side row, starting a right side row. And the right side is a row 1 in this particular pattern. So I'm on a row 1 and I'm going to go ahead and begin my bind off. Now, when it says bind off in pattern, that might throw you off a little if you've never done that before. So I'm going to show you what that means. To bind off in pattern means we're going to go ahead and we are going to work the stitches as they have normally been worked, meaning we're going to knit our knits and purl our purls. But this time, after we do our 2 stitches onto our right hand needle, we're going to have the back stitch jump the front stitch to do a bind off. So just like before, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to slip the first stitch as if to knit. I'm going to knit the next stitch. Now I have 2 stitches on my right hand needle and it's time to bind those off. So I'm going to take my left hand needle, I'm going to go into the first stitch, come over and off the needle, You see that? So now I'm left with 1 stitch. I can go ahead and drop my stitch marker at this point because I no longer need it. And I go ahead and I move on. I can see that this is a purl stitch. Can you see that bump? And I know I'm on a purl stitch. So I move my yarn to the front. I go ahead and I purl this stitch. And I'm back to 2 stitches over here. So I'm back to 2 stitches over here. I'm going to take my left hand needle, go into the back stitch, and have it leapfrog up and over that front stitch. Can you see that? Perfect. Again, I'm at a purl, so I bring my yarn to the front. I go into the stitch. I go ahead and I purl it and off. And then I want to bind off. Now you'll see that when I bind off, I'm moving my yarn back to the back because it's easier for me to do it that way than to fight the yarn and come over here and have it jump. But you could do it either way. You don't have to move your yarn to the back. You can leave it right here and then have it jump. That would be just fine. But I'm going up and over that front stitch and off. Now the next 2 stitches are knits. So I would go ahead and I would knit the first one. And I want to leapfrog over. I want to knit the next one. And I'm going to leapfrog over. And then I'm on to the purls. So I'm going to purl 1 and leapfrog over and purl 1 and leapfrog over. When I say leapfrog over, that's always been something that I just say to myself when I'm binding off, but that's what I'm doing is I'm binding off. So I've knit 1, I'm taking the back stitch over the front one. I knit 1, back stitch over the front one, and then I'm back to purl. So I purl 1, the back stitch over the front one. Can you see how this is working out? Purl 1, back stitch over the front one. What this does is it allows the stitches to be represented as they have been throughout the whole body of the pattern. And it makes a really nice clean finish of your stitch, of your scarf. So it makes it it's just that little finishing touch. If this is something that is a little bit hard for you, or you're like, you know what, I really just don't care, I don't want to bind off in pattern, you don't have to. It's okay. You could absolutely bind off as you have normally bound off, where it's, maybe it's knit 2 stitches and then have the back one jump the front one. That's fine. I do want to caution you though, do not bind it off too tight because this ribbing does have a very nice stretch to it. And if you bind off your edge too snug, your scarf isn't ever going to be able to stretch at the bottom portion as much as it does of the body of the scarf. Now I'm moving along right here as I'm talking to you guys, so that way I can get through this whole row, and I wanted you to be able to see all of these getting bound off. I'm on the last few. So I'm going to knit this one, back stitch jumps the front one, purl this one, back stitch jumps the front one, purl this one, back stitch jumps the front one. You'll realize that I'm always bringing my yarn forward if it's a purl. I'm to my marker, so I'm going to remove my marker. I'm on a knit. And then if you remember, this one was a purl. And then I cut my yarn. So I've jumped over my last one as I pop it off. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to grab my needles, or not my needles, my scissors. I'm going to cut a tail, leaving 4 to 6 inches because I always leave 4 to 6 inches. Isn't this cute? I put a pom-pom at the end of my scissors so that way I don't lose them because I tend to lose my scissors all the time. Once you have cut your tail, go ahead and take your needle and just pull that string all the way out. And if you give that a tug, your ribbed scarf is now complete. Isn't that cool? Isn't that cute? So cute. All right, so I'm going to show you how to weave in your ends real quick. So you have these 2 ends for this particular swatch that we've been looking at. So I'm going to take my darning needle and I'm going to take the tail and I'm going to go ahead and weave in my ends. If you take your tail and your darning needle and you take the tail and just pull it real snug around that needle and pinch it and then wiggle that on there, it makes it so it threads through really easily. I'm going to take my scarf, the bottom of my scarf here, and I'm going to take my darning needle, tapestry needle, whatever you want to call it, and I'm just going to start weaving it through. Now, for the bottom, you can go through and create the stitches as they are, meaning you could duplicate stitch where you kind of If it looks like a knit, you travel through like it's a knit. But I feel like if you do it this way, it's not that big of a deal. It weaves it in really nice and neat, and it's invisible, and I'm not too tight. See how I'm pulling that to make sure it's not too snug? Now I've went down this direction. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go back the other direction. Now, once again, this yarn is not the yarn that's used in the pattern. I did it so that way you guys could see the stitches as I'm knitting them or doing whatever it is I'm doing to them. If you're using a thicker yarn and maybe doing a stitch like this to weave in your ends makes it where it's too bulky, a little tip of what you can do is take the thick yarn that you're using and separate the plies. Okay, does that make sense? See, I'm making that real snug, or I'm making that real nice. Let's, for example, if it was this yarn, if this was the thick yarn, I could separate the plies. And then if I weave in this side and weave in this side, then it's not as thick and it becomes more invisible, okay? Once I've woven in my ends, I can take my scissors. I can cut my tail right up to the edge, set that aside, and my end is nice and woven in. You can't even tell. I could do the same thing up here and you'd be good to go. Okay. Now you know how to make the rib scarf. Again, it's designed by Kathy Wesley. It's available as a free pattern over at redheart.com, and all the materials you need are listed right there at redheart.com and are available for purchase. Makes it super easy. You can click on everything you need and have it delivered right to your door. I hope you enjoyed this video, and you will come back for more beginner knitting basic classes right here on the MarlyBird YouTube channel. I'll talk to you soon, and as my kids say, make sure you smash that like button. Thanks. Bye-bye.